Hi, welcome to the channel. Deployments in 40k is pretty critical. It has to keep your army safe and allow you to execute your plans for turn 1 and turn 2. There are loads of videos available about deployments, but they always focus on factions like the Space Marines, which are super easy to hide behind terrain and have great range guns so they don't need to worry about the vehicles pushing out. But what about armies with awkward or big models, or monsters and fly, things that don't walk through walls? How do they deploy? I'm going to go through all the things you need to think about when deploying. This isn't about top table tournament deployments, this is normal stuff we all do with armies filled with stuff we'd like to play with, not just the metalists. The standard advice is deploy like you're going second and hide everything. This works in an infantry meta where you can walk through walls. Also, Space Marine transports and tanks aren't that big, so easy to hide. I like playing big stuff, so Tyranid monsters, chaos demons, large orc things and knights. And these have to walk around walls, which can ruin your movement plans, especially if you're hiding them. They're big and unusual, so line of sight is easy and firing lines are hard to avoid. And no one talks about this, as it's always about deploying Space Marines. You want to avoid losing too many models if you go second. It needs to be a staging area to jump onto objectives and to get your key units into position, perhaps being turn 1 impactful, but certainly for turn 2. You need to be mindful to stop your opponent's game plans, and that's stuff like screening and deep strike denial. But the point that most videos don't discuss is playing to your army's strengths and weaknesses. You might be World Eaters and have nothing but melee, you might be Tyranids with big models but no invulns, you might be Orcs and have some tricky decisions around playing the War, and you might need to push out to get firing lines but need to be mindful that you can't handle melee. And I'm looking at you, Tau. Next is what you should aim to do with your first turn after deployment. How about trying to grab a no man's land objective, kill something, prepare your key units, go for a first turn charge? And you need to think about what you don't mind getting destroyed, as things will, and you need to make sure they trade well. Now we have what to achieve, let's go back to the start and see how to approach it all. Ask about your opponent's abilities and ranges. What are their movements? Can they advance and charge? The toughness of things as it matters to how you match up your weapons. Do they have fight first? Can anything fall back and do anything, so can you tie them up? And finally, what special shenanigans can that army do, as you don't want to line everything up just to be dealt a gotcha. I'm thinking Eldari Phantasm and Grey Knights jumping into reserves, but there's more. Don't feel rushed in deployments, take your time and measure everything. Know where your advance and charge can get to, know where your best guns can reach, make sure lone operatives will be safe. I've messed that one up very recently. Or if you have special aura abilities, will you or your opponent's units be in range? I'm thinking about Bellicor's safety bubble. There will be an amount of buildings in your deployment zone for you to use. Terrain is great now, it's really easy to get cover, and even better, everything can hide behind buildings and be obscured. The one thing to remember though is if you leave bits sticking out, then they can still target it, and that's back to the problem of big and awkward models. Only infantry and beasts can walk through walls, so vehicles and monsters have to waste time going round the outside. Fly is pretty rubbish because of measuring up and over terrain, so consider them as slow as anything else. Infantry deployment is therefore easy. They can be completely hidden in or behind buildings, they won't be blocked by movements, and there are only a few things to consider. Spreading out the infantry works well to screen, spread them out to get the best area covered. When placing infantry in a building, keep them just over 1 inch away from the wall to stop people charging in or through the wall. Transports can park hidden against the wall and disembark through the wall, great to keep them hidden and have unhindered delivery. Deep strike denial. If you have a unit with a special deniability, like the Space Marines Infiltrator Squad, then get them deployed first and screen as they cover a massive 12 inches. Denial rules trump everything else. This stops demons and Grey Knights dropping in within 9 and helps against Tyranid Ripper and Spore Mine spam. Being honest, there aren't that many units that can do this, only about 6, and they're an auto take. Here's a list of all of them in the game, feel free to pause and have a read. Some things to keep in mind. Don't infiltrate a unit forward just because it has the ability. Will it add anything? It can be on an objective or strategic piece of terrain, perhaps even put out to move block your opponent. I'm looking at you, Nurglings. Or you can do it to stop your opponent claiming some terrain. The reality is they're likely to get blasted off the table, and if you go second and have hidden everything else, then you're just giving your opponent some free targets. Place obvious units first and not give your opponent hints of your plan, something that holds a home field objective, things that are screening deep strike for you, anything that's out of line of sight of shooting. Keep your key turn 1 units to the last. Big items that are easy to be seen should be deployed behind a building, not in them, so they can get obscured. And this is the big one that people don't seem to discuss. Hide things, unless you don't need to. Orcs, World Eaters, Demons are not known for shooting and certainly aren't long range. You don't need to hide everything when you're facing against them, so for your own weapons with heavy, park them in the firing lanes ready and they won't lose the buff for moving. If you have cheap transports that are designed to soak up firepower and then dump a surprise load of infantry on the board, place them aggressively so they can maximise forward movement. Orc transports I'm thinking of here, and if your opponent's targeting your cheap transports, they aren't targeting the rest of your valuable stuff. You've saved your big melee monster to deploy last. There's no point holding it back as it needs to be in your opponent's lines to make itself valuable. If you hide it in deployment, it might be safe from your opponent's alpha strike if they go first, but then with movement they might still be able to get to see it, which is often the case for big awkward models. If you do try and hide it, you'll find you'll spend the next few turns moving it just to get it into the game, and then certainly it'll be an open target. Right at the start, with the benefit of knowing where your opponent's models are, can be the safest time to place it aggressively with the only goal of getting it up the table. It's your first turn now. And as I mentioned, you'll be holding your home objective and should try and grab another. This may mean pushing your opponents off one. Try and be efficient and kill something. You've thought about where you wanted your key units, now's the time to execute that plan. Of course, going second you may need to adapt, and that's part of the fun of the game. Consider your secondary cards. It's worth scoring as many as you can as early as you can, while you still have the ability to make that decision. If you're planning turn 1 charges or a big push, try not to overextend yourself, or spread the threat out across the entire table. Focusing on a flank or centre can make it harder for your opponent to deal with your threats. Deploying well and going second is easy, as you'll be able to push out in your turn, engage your opponent and make bold moves. If you go first though and your opponent is totally hidden, then this is the most difficult decision in the game. If you push out, it's unlikely you'll get to be as hidden as you were in deployment. The other option is to play a conservative first turn, use terrain as a staging area to get to and hide, prepare for turn 2. You'll score primaries at the start of your next turn, so you need to get something onto an objective. And when you do so, have contingency for things being destroyed. A transport with infantry inside is ideal. I played demons versus knights recently and went first, and I didn't make any bold moves out as my army would melt away. I let my opponent move out and then got charges across the board in my next turn. I also needed to play to the turn 2 restriction of bringing reserves in, so play to your army strengths. I also played Tyranids versus Black Templars, went first and went out aggressively, but because they were well hidden they stayed safe and in their first turn wiped out so many of my best units. This is how not to do it. That's the thing in 40k, you will find matchups which aren't favourable. A purely melee army going against a defensive shooting army will struggle to get across the board before they lose too much. It is tempting to be super aggressive, and I like aggressive deployments and play, but against certain armies that have the tools to hurt you, you should be more conservative. So much to think about, and I hope this has helped give you some ideas for your deployments, and I'd really like to hear how you do it. See you soon, bye!